I never imagined that a simple trip to the mall could change my life so completely. Yet that day, as I walked past the familiar storefronts, something inside me felt different. It wasn't just the way the sunlight hit the pavement or the hum of people chatting around me. It was a quiet pull, a whisper in the back of my mind, telling me that I could be someone else, someone I had hidden for far too long. My ex-husband, Mark, had always been critical, always judging, and somewhere along the way, I started to believe that I had to shrink to fit into the mold he approved of. I remember the sting of his words after our divorce, the casual cruelty hidden in his sighs and comments, and how he made me feel like a shadow of myself. But that day, as I passed a clothing store with a window display of elegant dresses, I paused. The reflection staring back at me wasn't just my own. I saw a version of me that I had buried, the me I wanted to explore, delicate, confident, undeniably feminine. I stepped inside, my heart racing. I had always been cautious about stepping outside the lines, about exploring my softer side, but something about that afternoon gave me courage. The first dress I picked up was silk, a gentle pink shade that felt like it had been made for me alone. Holding it against my body, I felt a thrill I couldn't name, a mixture of fear and excitement, like standing on the edge of a cliff and realizing flying was an option. I wandered through the aisles, touching fabrics I had never allowed myself to wear, imagining the reflection in the mirror, imagining the reactions, the shock, the awe. And then it hit me. Why was I doing this for anyone but myself? The idea of changing for Mark, for him to notice me, had lost all appeal. This was for me, for my own rediscovery. I started small. I bought a few pieces, a soft cardigan, a flowing skirt, subtle makeup. Back home, I laid everything out, examining the textures, the colors, the way each piece made me feel. Sitting in front of my mirror, I hesitated, my hands trembling slightly as I touched my face, experimenting with mascara and blush, careful not to overdo it, but eager to see what I could create. The reflection staring back at me gradually shifted. The familiar face softened, features appearing more delicate, lines seeming to fade into shadows. I felt a thrill of recognition, not in the mirror, but inside me. This was the me that had always been waiting. Then came the first real test. My friends had always been supportive, but this was different. I invited a few close ones over, showing up in a new outfit, letting my hair fall softly around my shoulders, makeup applied with careful patience. Their reactions were immediate, eyes widening, smiles spreading. "Wow, you look amazing," one friend whispered. And in that moment, I realized something. I didn't need Mark's recognition to validate this transformation. I didn't need anyone else to see me as I saw myself. But part of me couldn't ignore the thought, the possibility of him seeing me, truly seeing me, in this new form. Weeks passed, and I became bolder. I experimented with styles, colors, and textures, learning how different fabrics moved with me, how certain shades highlighted features I had never appreciated before. Each morning, I would spend longer in front of the mirror, practicing expressions, refining movements, discovering nuances in my voice. It wasn't just appearance, it was presence, the way I carried myself. I began walking with a subtle sway, letting my hands fall softly by my sides, noticing how the smallest changes could ripple outward, transforming the way the world perceived me. The day I saw Mark again was completely accidental. I had gone to the coffee shop we used to frequent, the place filled with memories both bitter and sweet. I had wrapped a light scarf around my shoulders, worn a dress that flowed just past my knees, and styled my hair in soft waves. I was nervous, but part of me wanted to see him, to witness the look on his face. And then, there he was, sitting at a corner table, absorbed in his laptop. I froze for a moment, heart hammering, breath shallow. As he looked up, our eyes met. And then, the strangest thing happened. He blinked, his expression frozen, confusion flickering across his face. "Do I know you?" he asked, a faint laugh of disbelief in his voice. I smiled, a calm, self-assured smile, something I had never mustered in front of him before. "It's me," I said softly, letting the words hang in the air. His eyebrows furrowed, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to force recognition to surface. But it didn't. Not immediately. Not the Mark who had once claimed to know me inside and out. This was a new me, one he hadn't encountered, one he couldn't simply dismiss. And for the first time, I felt a sense of power, a quiet triumph that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with reclaiming myself. Even after he realized it was me, the conversation that followed was surreal. He tried to mask his surprise with awkward jokes, shifting the topic, but I could see it, an undercurrent of astonishment, an inability to reconcile the person in front of him with the woman he had once thought he knew. And as I walked away from that table, feeling the fabric of my dress sway around me, I understood something profound. This transformation wasn't just physical. It was emotional, psychological, spiritual. I had confronted my insecurities, my fears, and emerged on the other side, not as someone seeking approval, but as someone who finally recognized herself. From that day forward, I embraced every aspect of my femininity, each outfit, each subtle gesture, a testament to the journey I had undertaken. And while Mark may never fully understand the person I had become, it didn't matter. Because for the first time in years, I had recognized myself, and that recognition, that acceptance, was enough. The journey had been long, full of hesitation and doubt, but standing in my reflection, I knew I had arrived, not at his perception of me, but at my own. After that encounter with Mark, life took on a strange, exhilarating rhythm. I realized that each day offered a new chance to explore myself, and with each step, the world responded differently. Walking down the street, I noticed subtle glances, quick double takes, not from judgment, but from curiosity, admiration, and sometimes envy. It was intoxicating, not because I craved attention, but because I was finally being seen, not the version of me that had cowered under someone else's expectations, but the real me, the me I had fought so hard to uncover. I started experimenting with more daring styles. Pastels gave way to jewel tones, soft silks became structured fabrics, and skirts flowed into elegant dresses that made me feel taller, more confident, more present. Makeup became a ritual, a daily meditation rather than a simple cosmetic task. I learned how to highlight my cheekbones, elongate my eyes, soften my jawline. I practiced walking in heels, not just to imitate someone else, but to feel the power in every careful step, the subtle shift of balance that made me feel poised and alive. Even my voice began to change, softer yet firm, a melody of warmth and strength, something I could never have imagined expressing before. Friends and colleagues began noticing the change, too. Some were shocked initially, unsure how to respond, but over time, their admiration grew. Invitations increased, lunches, dinners, events, and I found myself engaging in social situations I had once avoided, no longer hiding behind baggy clothes or half-hearted smiles. I even started keeping a journal, documenting every detail of my transformation, from wardrobe experiments to emotional breakthroughs. Each entry reinforced the fact that this wasn't a phase or a whim. This was me coming into my own, brick by brick, choice by choice. And then there were the memories, haunting echoes of the life I had left behind with Mark. I thought about the arguments, the subtle belittling, the constant feeling of being insufficient. Those memories used to weigh heavily, but now they became benchmarks, reminders of how far I had come. One evening, as I sifted through old photographs, I realized I no longer felt bitterness. I felt gratitude. Gratitude that those experiences had pushed me to this moment, had forced me to explore parts of myself that I might never have known. The girl in those photos looked happy enough, but timid, constrained, unaware of her own potential. The woman in the mirror now was unstoppable, unafraid, luminous. Curiosity about my ex-husband lingered like a shadow, though. I wanted to see the impact of my transformation, to understand the effect of stepping fully into this identity. I knew it was risky. I knew emotions could flare. But I needed closure, and perhaps a touch of vindication, not in the sense of revenge, but in the affirmation of my own power. One evening, I learned that Mark was attending a charity gala downtown. I hesitated, weighing my options. Would I attend? Would I reveal myself? Or would I simply let him remain a ghost from my past? But the allure was too strong. The chance to see him confronted with the woman I had become, the confident, radiant version of me, was irresistible. I spent hours preparing. Hair meticulously styled, makeup flawless, a long emerald gown hugging my curves in all the right places. Jewelry sparkled subtly, complementing without overpowering. I practiced my posture, the tilt of my chin, the cadence of my steps. By the time I reached the gala, I felt a thrilling mix of anxiety and exhilaration. The venue was buzzing with guests, laughter and clinking glasses filling the air. And there he was, Mark, across the room, talking to mutual acquaintances. I froze for a fraction of a second, feeling the familiar nervous flutter, but then I remembered all the mornings I had spent in front of the mirror, practicing this exact moment. I walked in, steady and deliberate, letting the atmosphere react to me before I even spoke. When his eyes finally met mine, time seemed to stretch. Recognition didn't come immediately. Instead, there was confusion, disbelief, a flicker of panic almost masked by an awkward smile. "Do I know you?" he stammered, echoing that earlier moment in the coffee shop, but this time the context magnified it. I let a small smile play at my lips, an expression of serene control. "It's me," I said again, softly, firmly, letting each syllable carry the weight of the transformation, the journey, the person I had become. He blinked, speechless, his eyes tracing every detail, trying to reconcile the past with the present. The reactions around him mirrored mine, guests noticing the brief exchange, whispers flowing like a current through the room. And then, slowly, he nodded, a mix of acknowledgement and astonishment. No words could capture the full complexity of what I had achieved. In that moment, I understood that transformation isn't just physical. It is the convergence of courage, self-discovery, and resilience. The new me was not a disguise to fool anyone, not a game or experiment. It was an identity that had grown from fear into authenticity, from hesitation into boldness, and from shadows into a radiant presence that could not be ignored. As the evening progressed, I mingled with confidence, noting every reaction, every glance, every whispered comment. I was aware of Mark's gaze, the subtle shifts in his demeanor, but I didn't chase his attention. I let him observe, let him realize, let him comprehend that I had changed not for him, but for myself. Each step I took reinforced my control, my authority over my own narrative, and by the time the gala ended, I had achieved a quiet triumph far more satisfying than any confrontation could provide. Walking away into the night, I understood that this journey was ongoing, filled with challenges, risks, and self-discovery. And I welcomed it wholeheartedly. After the gala, life seemed to take on a surreal quality. Everywhere I went, the reflections in shop windows, the faces of strangers, even the familiarity of my own apartment, felt different. I was no longer the same person who had tiptoed through life, cautious, hesitant, shrinking myself to fit expectations. Each day brought new experiments, new hairstyles, daring outfits, bolder makeup looks, gestures, and ways of speaking. I reveled in the discovery of my own nuances. The way a flick of the wrist could express elegance, the subtle shift of a smile could convey confidence, the tilt of my head could make the world pause for a moment. And yet, beneath this newfound poise, there was something more, a quiet ache that whispered about the past, about Mark, about the life I had left behind. One afternoon, I received a message from a mutual acquaintance, almost casually, asking if I would attend a reunion of old friends. Part of me hesitated. I hadn't imagined seeing the people I once knew in my old life, especially those who had seen me in my most vulnerable, unrefined state. But then I realized, this wasn't about them. This was about me stepping fully into my identity, letting the person I had become interact with the world that had once constrained me. I agreed, feeling a thrill mixed with nervous anticipation. The day of the reunion arrived, and I prepared meticulously. I chose a midnight blue dress, flowing yet structured, accentuating curves I had learned to embrace. Hair swept into soft waves, makeup highlighting my features without overpowering, jewelry subtle but elegant. As I looked in the mirror, I felt an unfamiliar sense of pride, not vanity, but ownership of myself. I was walking into a room full of familiar faces as someone wholly new, someone unapologetically me. When I arrived, the room seemed unchanged, yet every detail felt amplified. The chatter, the laughter, the familiar voices, all seemed to echo my own internal heartbeat. And then I saw him, Mark. He had arrived with a casual confidence, but the instant our eyes met, that confidence faltered. For a heartbeat, he froze, caught somewhere between disbelief and recognition. "Is that you?" he asked, his voice uncertain, almost afraid of being wrong. I smiled, calm and poised. "It's me," I said simply, letting the simplicity of the truth carry all the weight of the transformation. The room seemed to quiet around us. Whispers rippled through our friends, some intrigued, some shocked, all captivated by the contrast between the past and present. Mark took a hesitant step forward, then another, studying me with a meticulous intensity. There was a flinch in his eyes, a subtle pang of regret, and yet a hint of admiration that he could not quite conceal. I barely recognize you," he admitted, his voice low, tinged with awe. And in that moment, I understood something profound. My transformation wasn't just about appearance. It was about reclamation. Every glance, every gesture, every carefully crafted detail had been a deliberate act of self-assertion, of courage amplified by the desire to be fully seen, not by him, but by myself. As the night went on, I mingled with old friends, sharing laughter and stories, feeling the warmth of genuine connection. And while Mark lingered nearby, I could sense his internal struggle. He had known me intimately, once upon a time, yet this new version of me challenged every memory, every assumption. He realized that the woman in front of him was not just the result of external change, but the embodiment of an inner metamorphosis he had never witnessed. And though part of me expected resentment or awkwardness, I was met with something else. Quiet acknowledgement, a subtle respect for the journey I had undertaken. Later, after most guests had left, I found myself standing on a balcony overlooking the city lights. Mark approached, hesitating, unsure if he should speak or simply observe. "I have to admit," he said quietly, "you've changed. Completely." I smiled softly, feeling the weight of those words, not as validation, but as recognition. "I had to," I replied, the tone gentle yet firm. "Not for you, not for anyone, but for me." I realized I was hiding, shrinking, letting the world dictate who I could be. And I couldn't anymore. His gaze softened, a mixture of regret, awe, and something else I couldn't quite name. Walking home that night, I felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. My transformation was no longer just a series of external changes. It had become a full-fledged reinvention of my identity. And yet, there was a lingering tension, a sense that the journey was far from over. Mark's recognition had provided closure in one way, but it had also awakened questions about my future, about how fully I could embrace this new life, and about the challenges I would face in a world that had never been fully kind to someone exploring the spectrum of gender and expression. In the days that followed, I continued to refine my style, my movements, my voice. Every mirror became a teacher, every reflection a testament to progress. And yet, the encounter with Mark haunted me, not with bitterness, but with a reminder of how far I had come. I realized that true transformation is not a single event, but a series of conscious choices, each one building upon the last. It's about courage in the face of fear, authenticity in the face of expectation, and vulnerability in the face of judgment. And as I looked in the mirror each morning, tracing the lines of my face, adjusting the sweep of my hair, and choosing outfits that spoke to my evolving self, I felt something I had never felt before. Complete ownership of my identity, a quiet power that radiated from within, undeniable and unshakable. The weeks after the reunion felt like stepping into a new life entirely. Every day brought subtle victories. Moments where I realized I was no longer just the reflection in the mirror, but the woman inhabiting it fully. I started attending events alone, confidently navigating rooms filled with strangers who only saw me for who I truly was. No explanations, no apologies, just presence. And the strange thing was, each interaction reinforced something I had always feared I'd lose: connection. People responded not to the timid, uncertain version of me, but to the poised, radiant, unapologetic woman I had become. Mark remained in the background of my life, a faint echo of the past I once carried with me. But I noticed subtle shifts in his demeanor when we crossed paths. Sometimes his eyes lingered, as if he were trying to trace the journey etched into my face. Other times, he attempted casual conversation, testing the waters of normalcy, but always faltering under the weight of unspoken acknowledgement. He hadn't changed me, I had changed myself. That distinction was critical, a line I could never cross again. I understood that the power of transformation wasn't to provoke jealousy or regret, It was to reclaim identity, to embrace courage, and to step into life with authenticity. One rainy afternoon, I walked past the coffee shop where he and I had first had that unexpected encounter. Memories surged, arguments, laughter, the silent frustration of unfulfilled expectations. But they no longer carried the sting of shame or regret. I paused outside, watching the reflections ripple across the wet pavement. In a fleeting thought, I wondered if he ever thought of me as the person I had become. Then I smiled, realizing it didn't matter. Recognition, after all, was optional. Empowerment, however, was absolute. My personal style continued to evolve. No longer constrained by hesitation, I experimented with bold colors, dramatic silhouettes, and intricate textures. Hair and makeup became an art, every detail a brushstroke in the living canvas that was me. I learned how to move deliberately, how to occupy space without apology, how to speak with conviction while retaining softness. Friends, colleagues, and even casual acquaintances began seeking me out, drawn not just to appearance, but to the confidence and authenticity radiating from me. I felt magnetic, not because I was performing, but because I was fully alive, fully myself. One evening, as I returned home from a gallery opening, Mark unexpectedly appeared outside my apartment building. The timing was uncanny, and for a brief moment, I felt a flutter of old nervousness. But then I reminded myself of everything I had endured, every choice I had made, every boundary I had crossed to reclaim my life. He stopped me cautiously,